Well, good day and welcome to SOP, Save Our Planet. My name is Gary Willing. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. I always do two things before I start these videos because at least the first thing I think is the most important thing that anybody can do after listening to this video. And that is, if you want to know more about what I'm saying, if you want to see if this information is true for you or not, the best thing to do is to do a little research, look into this information for yourself. If you check out the description portion of this video, there's a link at the very top, and it will take you to the best website to get the best background information, and that is the Share International site. So that's why I always recommend it. The information is free. It's also very useful. So hopefully you'll check it out. The second thing that I'm hoping that you do is to join the discussion. If you need clarification on a video that I said or what I said in a video, or if you actually do go to the Share International site and you have a question about what was said or something like that, post your question in the comment section. I'll try to answer it in a video or two and that kind of thing. If you have an email and you want to email me the question, email me. Search for signs@mail.com or simply just let me know what you think by posting a comment. All right, now I'm going to start with this comment because this one actually literally left me LOLing. And that's text for laugh out loud. And it's coming from Rick. It said, "Thanks, Gary. I appreciate you, the past, present, and future Gary." Rick, that's 3 Garys in a room, and I don't know how well they would get along, but we'll see. Anyway, moving on. However, I think you got yourself backwards at time frame 1434, where you said, quote, "Be cynical and not skeptical." Yeah, I screwed that up. I'm sorry. What I meant to say was be skeptical and not cynical, of course. Yes. But the good news is most people don't listen to my videos all the way to minute mark 14, so the 14-minute mark. So I'm probably pretty safe, but you picked up on it. Thank you for the comment. You also went on to say, "I would like to believe that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene have been inspired to see the errors of her extreme right politics. One would think that even simple-minded people like Trump himself could be easily persuaded by vision. But that would take a whole lot of belief." Oh yeah, for sure. And it would take a whole lot of knocking on that noggin of his. I don't think Trump is going to ever see the light. It's going to take him a little while longer than this lifetime to probably figure that one out. But I don't know, man. I've been shocked. And I would have said the same thing about Marjorie Taylor Greene just a little while ago for sure. What he's talking about, I mentioned this in a few videos. I'm starting to see a shift in some very well-known right-wing figures who have been very much on the right for a very long time and very vocal. And she's one of them. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a congresswoman from my own state. She doesn't live too far from where I live. And for years, she's been very prominent in the MAGA movement, saying a lot of crazy stuff, a lot of inflammatory stuff, and really a lot of anger and bigoted things, in a lot of ways, right? Now, what happened? Well, I noticed a shift in her months ago, actually, and I've been kind of waiting to see if I was right about it, and I am right about it. I'm right about everything. No, I'm just kidding. No, but I was right about this one thing with her, and it starts with actually changing a perception of my own self. Okay, so this came from a Maitreya experience that I actually had a few years back. And it goes like this. So I was lying in bed with my wife, and I had come across my baby book, and I found a photograph. It was actually the first photograph of me as a child in the crib in the hospital that they took, and I looked like I was a boxer because I had one fist up toward my face and the other one down toward my chest. And I saw this cute photo of myself like this, and I turned to my wife and I said, "It's like I've been fighting my whole life." Right? Which in a lot of ways I am a fighter in that same kind of way. I fight work and fighting this and fighting that, and it was exhausting, really. And then I saw this picture of me, and then I said that to my wife. Well, a few days after that, I had a Maitreya experience where he came to my work and he was like, he did that same thing. He put one fist up to his head, just in the same way I did as a baby, the other one down toward my chest, and he starts shadow boxing me, and then he goes, and I'd never seen this guy before, and he knew my name, and he goes, "Gary, it's like you've been fighting your whole life, man." And then he goes, "But you're starting to learn what I learned a long time ago," is what he said. And so the times in my life when I catch myself fighting everything, I try to remember that, and I try to just let it be, right? And what I noticed with her a few months ago, and I can't remember exactly when it is she was going off on one of her tirades about the left and about this and how great Trump is, and people were kind of snapping back at her. And she just kind of looked into the camera and goes, I'm just exhausted. I'm just so tired. And I heard that, and I saw myself in that, what she was saying. And I was like, oh, there's something about to change with her. This is the thought that I had. And she even talked about it recently, where she's been thinking about this for quite some time. And I think it was around that time that she said that out loud. I don't think she maybe realized that she said it, but she said how tired she was. And it's much easier to see in other people, especially someone as pronounced as she was, for lack of a better phrase, to see that what you put out, you get back. So she was fighting everybody, calling everybody names, kicking protesters as they were standing in front of her, questioning her in the street and stuff. She was kicking this woman, right? I mean, fighting everybody. And they were all fighting back at her, and there's a lot more of them than her. And it was just wearing her down, I think. But it shows what you put out, you get back. And then, I think here recently, she's had what alcoholics refer to as a moment of clarity, is all it is. She's not changing her ideology. She's not converting from Christianity to New Age thinking or becoming more left or whatever. She just had this moment of clarity, like, I can't do this, what I've been doing, right? Because she really couldn't. She couldn't maintain it for very long, And it's just like when somebody's an alcoholic and they don't realize it, and they wake up one night because they just wrapped their car around a tree after drinking and driving on the way home, and they go, I can't do this anymore. This is destroying my life, right? I think she had that same kind of moment about Trump. But it's not about her. It's about, as per se, and I mean, we're talking about her, but it's also about the people that she represents. And she's a congresswoman, so she has a constituency here in Georgia, but she also represents millions of people that listen to her and follow her tweets and so forth. And for her to have this epiphany about herself, about the way that she's been fighting the left and how bigoted she's been toward the left, but also about the infatuation and the devotion that she had toward Trump and how it really wasn't what she thought. They must be having it too. And she's not the only one on the right that has had this epiphany. There's been others, and I mentioned them, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen, and some others that I can't really remember by name, but they're starting to realize that what they thought is not real. And then the other side of it is you have those on the left who are opening up to someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who really despised them not too long ago and are showing her some compassion and understanding. And others are cynical and very critical of her still. And you can see that they have to do what these others are doing. But the notion that she could have gone on The View last year at this time, saying what she was saying for years, and have this civil conversation with Whoopi Goldberg and these others would have never happened. So what you put out, you get back, and that was one of the things that I realized from one of Maitreya's teachings too about me, as I was very critical of other people, just as she was very critical of them. And when I stopped being critical of them, they changed their view toward me, which is exactly what's happening with her. It's clear, right? But to see it, and it's wonderful to see. But I think it really started when she said that out loud months ago. I'm just so tired, She really could feel it. I could feel the awareness in what she was doing and how fighting was really starting to hurt her. It harms you in that way when you're that angry at everything like she was. It was crazy. But then she even went on, since I recorded the last video, and she said, I humbly apologize for all that I've said and done. I mean, I had never in a million years thought that she would do this. And I'm going to go out on another limb and say that I think that she had a Maitreya experience, actually. That would be the quickest way for her to change in that way, for himself, whether it was a dream experience or him just opening her heart from the other side of the planet, or if she actually physically saw him as a familiar. I don't know, right? But she's changed. to be honest. And will it mean that she won't say crazy stuff in the future? She'll probably say some crazy stuff that I don't agree with, but she said herself now, and you would have never heard this. She goes, we on the right and those on the left actually agree on more things than we disagree with. It's crazy. You know what I'm saying? But it is, the other thing too I want to say about this MAGA movement that I was originally quite alarmed about, because they were so devoted to Trump on everything, and they still are to a large extent. But it's important to understand it from the perspective of what we're talking about with Maitreya and the Masters coming back into the everyday world. There's a reason why this is going on. And it was actually foretold in one of Benjamin Crumb's Masters articles, actually. Because he talked about, at the time that Maitreya comes out and is known for who he is, more and more people who were never interested in politics would start to become interested in politics. And you can see these people who don't really know a lot about the history of politics of this country are very now interested in politics, think they know everything, even though they haven't really done a lot of study on both sides, right? It's okay, but it's a part of the process. But the other thing I wanted to say is, and maybe shed a little bit of light on, is the effect that Maitreya's energy has on humanity. That these masters, when we get into contact and proximity with them, how it affects us. And these masters can't even predict themselves the result of that contact. Okay, so Maitreya is coming back into the everyday world, and then millions upon millions of people who I think are very aspirational. They desire a savior figure to come into their lives because they're religious, right? They're wanting Christ to come back from the clouds, and they expect him to come back in that way. And they haven't seen him in the clouds yet, right? So then they assign that aspiration onto somebody like Trump. When in actuality, it's this distorted view of what's really going on, because Maitreya is that figure that they're looking for, that galvanizer, that champion of peace, who he really is. They're assigning it to someone who really doesn't deserve their devotion or their deification, i.e. Trump, right? And they kind of did it with George W. Bush, but they're doing it way more with Trump now. So, but it's because the masters are coming back into the everyday world that they're even looking for this constant rumination for looking for the Antichrist from people is also the same thing. They're sensing something. And what they're sensing is the fact that Maitreya is actually here and it's affecting them. But they don't know who Maitreya is. They're conditioned by their own dogma to think that to look for the Antichrist first, and that's why they're saying it that way. That's why they're thinking it in that way, and that's why they're looking for the Antichrist in that way, right? It's becoming that way. Now, the other thing too is, and this is maybe perhaps might be illuminating for some who don't know this, but we don't really understand how connected our minds are. That really what you think you to be is not all you, unique you. Yes, we are individualized, but our minds are connected a lot more than we realize. So a lot of what you identify as you is not really you. It's society you. It's what society has conditioned you to believe. But there is a universal mind, too, of humanity. They call it the mind belt. And these masters affect it whether they want to or not by just getting in contact with that mind of humanity. But they use it also constructively. So they need an invention or an idea to come out, right? So they plant this idea, this thought form into the mind belt of humanity, and whoever's responsive to it might pick up on it. So the thought form of Maitreya has started to hit the mind belt, and these people are responding in the way that they're responding, is my point. But if you know anything about the history of certain inventors like Alexander Graham Bell, this historically happened. There were two inventors, Alexander Graham Bell and another who we don't know of because he was second. You know, if you ain't first, you're last, right? Invented the phone in exactly the same way at almost exactly the same time. It's just that he put the patent in first and the other one didn't. But they picked up on that invention that was put there by these masters. But the other thing too that's quite extraordinary that I guess was extraordinary enough to talk about, but one of the masters, the master Rakuzi, who was in a previous lifetime Comte Saint-Germain, and before that was Francis Bacon. He is now one of the masters, and one of his jobs is on the inner planes. He's starting to control the affairs of the Americas, Europe, and Australia. And when he did this, and this was written down in the Alice Bailey books, at the time that he took over the control of the affairs of that region of the world on the inner planes, this thought came up about Francis Bacon. And it's the Bacon-Shakespeare conspiracy or a theory or something. I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, what came out was people started to talk about Francis Bacon. They hadn't been talking about him for centuries. And all of a sudden, bam, all of a sudden these people started going, oh, he was the one that wrote Shakespeare, not Shakespeare. And then there was this conspiracy theory that Shakespeare was credited with writings that he didn't actually write. Now, in reality, he actually did write those. But the thought form that came out of it was because of the fact that this particular master started to take control of the affairs of that part of the world. And so when Maitreya comes in and enters the world, you have all these aspirants, these people with this desire for their teacher to come back. They start to assign it to somebody like Trump, for instance. So that's what I think is really going on. So for her to have this moment of clarity, to see that what she's been thinking all along is unreal, there are millions upon millions of others who are obviously experiencing the same thing, right? The other thing that is there within the hearts of these MAGA people is this longing for peace and freedom. Now, they don't know how to get there, right? And this is something that I think is very, very hard for Americans to reconcile in their own minds, is freedom and justice are one and the same. You cannot have true freedom without true justice, just as you can't have true justice without true freedom. And the only way to bring about true justice is for people's needs to be taken care of. And the only way to do that is through socialism, really. And yet, in America, they think socialism is evil because they're believing this lie that's perpetrated from the establishment who don't want socialism. So they have duped a lot of those people to think that the way to help benefit their own life is for the government to give billions upon billions of dollars to the rich so they can get richer, and then eventually it will affect your life down the road at some point and you'll be better off because of it. Well, it's a lie. It's a scam, right? The best way to do it is for the government to give the money to the people spend it, improve their life, and it trickles back up to the rich because they own all the businesses. But, it's going to be hard for Americans to reconcile this until they realize that, yes, true justice and true freedom are one and the same. And Maitreya will express this and eventually share this with us, that the truth of that statement. But what we're seeing is the beginning of it. It's because these people who are very hardened to other people, their hearts are opening up a little bit. Like I said, it doesn't mean that Marjorie Taylor Greene's not going to say stuff that's going to make me cringe in the future. But something's happened with her. And I have to not be as critical of her as I used to be because I'm just allowing the process to take place. The other thing, too, is Maitreya said to someone in the Share International group, actually it wasn't Maitreya, it was the Master Jesus, excuse me. This woman was having a problem with George W. Bush. And she was talking to this businessman on a flight who ended up being the Master Jesus as a familiar. And he said to her that if with people that you're having a problem with, such as George W. Bush, to surround them with love. And she said, why would I do that? And he goes, well, it's easier for people to change when they're surrounded by love. So, something to think about. But thank you very much for the comment, nonetheless. All right, so I had an email that I wanted to answer a few questions. Let's see. Hello, Gary. I watched your latest video earlier today of hoarding food in warehouses and not giving to starving people was the most distressing to me. I can hardly get my mind around this and feel like I'm going to freak out. What the hell? Sorry to laugh. Where did you discover this? What can I do about it? I cannot live my life knowing this is happening. Please help me. So if I can help you in any way, Eileen, hear me out, okay? That's my daughter saying, hear me out. Don't freak out. That's the worst thing to do. You know, it is okay, and it is very possible, and not only is it possible, it's the truth within our hearts, actually, to experience joy and also experience the pain and suffering of the world at the same time. And when you do that, you don't freak out. The first and most important thing is to discover yourself and realize yourself as the soul. Practice honesty of mind, sincerity of spirit, and detachment. You can't really do anything until if you're attached, to anything. And if you practice that as a meditation throughout your day, it will change you and change your perception on you and yourself in the world and in the world in you. But don't freak out. And the other thing I wanted to say in regards to your comment about freaking out and also about experiencing the suffering in the world is, it's been said by Benjamin Creme that within the heart of Maitreya is all the suffering in the world, all the pain, all the loss that we all experience on a moment-to-moment basis throughout the world. He experiences along with each and every one of us, even though we don't realize that he's experiencing it on the other side of the world at that time. So all the times you've broken down in private, in pain and suffering in your life, and I'm sure we all have, he experienced it along with you. Also, those moments in your life when you really do feel love for another, or hope for humanity, or really experience joy, he experiences it and shares it along with you, actually. Can you imagine? We can't feel it on his level yet because he's where he's at. He's manifesting that love. He's actually embodying that love in that way. But you can experience joy in your heart and the pain and suffering at the same time. And then you don't freak out. Then you start to do something about it. You ask, what can I do about it? Well, you can talk about this with people. See, if you look at the news, right, or if you look at media as a whole, independent podcasters, Spotify, YouTubers, such as myself, right, mainstream and legacy media, right, you got people talking about the problems. Some of them are very, very keen on the problems, can describe it in so many ways that you're like, oh my gosh, it's just that bad? And then you start to freak out a little bit. You feel a little overwhelmed, don't you? Right? I know I do. And then those people who perhaps don't know as much as those who are in the know start to make shit up, which makes it even worse, right? And then you really feel overwhelmed. You're like, I can't do anything about this. But you can. Because none of those people, by and large, who have a huge following and millions upon millions of people listening to them on a daily basis that are talking about the problems, are actually talking about any solutions. And Maitreya will say the very first solution that we have to put in place, is for the principle of sharing to take place. That's it. We cannot even solve the problem of the environment until we share. There's no other way, And then what I would suggest to do, if you haven't already, is to study the principle of sharing. Go on the Share International site and read some of the articles from Benjamin Creme where the title, sharing, is in the title. And you can really understand a little bit better about what sharing really is. Do nations have resources that they hoard? Yes, they do. The United States has, and the United States is not alone in this, we just are one of the richest countries, so we have a lot of it. But we have strategic reserves. They talk about it in this way. We hoard corn, we hoard wheat, we hoard food, we hoard metal, wood, building products in case there's some kind of disaster. We also hoard it so that the price goes up. So, but we hoard it, and then a lot of it just goes bad and we just throw it out. Corporations hoard stuff. We throw stuff out all the time. Restaurants do, grocery stores do, those kind of things, right? And we don't have to do that either. So the other resources like wood and metal and stuff perhaps don't go bad, but we hoard it just to keep it there, just in case, right? When we could easily give it to another country to help them out. The masters will say and Maitreya will say this, that every single nation has at least one excess of something to give to the global community. But most people, when they talk about the principle of sharing, and most people, when they hear the word sharing, they think it means individuals giving to organizations that are corrupt, that are probably going to keep most of the money or whatever and not really do what they say they're going to do. And then eventually it'll get to the poor people. Well, that's not what Maitreya is suggesting and advocating as the principle of sharing. It's nations giving to other nations. Those nations then giving back in payment what they took. So it's not even nations like rich nations like China and Russia and the United States giving to poorer nations and that's it. Those poorer nations have to give something back. And in that process, Eileen, there will start to be a little more cooperation, a little more trust, which is what we saw in the Marshall Plan. So the list of nations that participated in the Marshall Plan, and I'm just going to list off the ones that come to my mind: Italy, United States, Spain. I think Spain was on it. West Germany, England, were at some point at war with one another. You know, even just during World War I and World War II, but even before that, those empires battled one another over resources. The United States was at war with England and vice versa and so forth, right? The United States was at war with Germany and vice versa prior to that. But since then, zero, nil, nada, none of the nations have attacked one another. So what happened? Well, that process of the principle of sharing created a little bit of goodwill amongst them. They started to trust one another a little bit better. Trust each other enough to not attack another country. You see what I'm saying? So, you have the knowledge of the solution. I didn't come up with this concept of sharing. It's not my vision that came up with it. I'm just sharing the information that I have, right? You can do the same thing. I'm not saying that you should run up to a stranger and start yelling at them about the principle of sharing, bringing about peace, but talk about it with people. More and more people are starting to talk about the problems and address the problems. Well, great. We're seeing the problem, but what's the solution? Well, the solution is sharing. If they say that would never work, then say, well, has anything that we've done worked? Has attacking a country worked? Has doing what Trump just did to Iran, where we lobbed missiles on behalf of Israel into Iran, and then him saying, well, now's the time for peace. Is that going to bring about peace? It doesn't. You know the reason why I can say that? Because it never has. And then you can look at it historically, talk about the historical fact of the Marshall Plan bringing about cooperation. And even if they reject it, even if they say, it's never going to work, you got the conversation, you got the ball rolling. So even someone who I think is just a wonderful, incredible, loving master, the Lord of Love, Maitreya, cannot save the world on his own. It's going to take 1 billion people or more doing this. You're a part of the 1 billion people. I'm sure of it. Start the process now. Help him out. Start talking about the principle of sharing with people, so that when they hear him say it, it will make a little bit more sense for them, perhaps. And then if you want to talk about it in relation to Maitreya, then bring it up. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. That will help, right? So hopefully that makes a little sense. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of hope, because if you are doing something about the problems in the world, if you're addressing the solutions to the problems of the world, you're also creating hope. And when you put out hope, you start to get hope. You know what I mean? Because people are freaking out about the problem. They're not talking about it, but you can really tell. And people are really starting to try to isolate themselves from everybody else because they don't know what to do. So talk about it. And like I said, the thing that will be very hard for Americans to understand is just how important justice is, and talk about that. That you really can't have true freedom without true justice. It's a truth that we need to share, right? Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. But anyway, thank you very much for that. Now, the other question you asked was about Sai Baba, who's this picture right here in the bottom corner. So Sai Baba is the second of 3 incarnations of this, what the masters refer to as a cosmic Christ. So Maitreya embodies the Christ principle on the planetary level. Sai Baba, who is not even from our solar system, he's here on our planet out of incarnation, but is still here on our planet. And he embodies the Christ principle on a cosmic level. Now, let me stop right there. Don't ask me what the difference is, because I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm not at that level. But it is unbelievably rare all throughout all the solar systems in our galaxy to find a Christ on the planetary level like Maitreya. We actually have two. We have Maitreya and the Buddha. And then it would be probably even more unbelievably rare to have three: a cosmic Christ like Satya Sai Baba, Maitreya on the planetary level, and the Buddha. So something's going on this planet. But anyway, we have that much help, right? But Satya Sai Baba's first incarnation, I think it was Sai Baba Shirdi. He lived, I think, in the 1800s, and then he went out of incarnation, came back in as Satya Sai Baba. Satya Sai Baba just went out of incarnation, and he's about to be incarnated again as another Sai Baba, or unless he already has, you know. But these masters, not all of them, I mean, all these masters have now conquered death, just as Jesus did in the Bible, as it was symbolized as the resurrection. Each one of these masters don't need to incarnate anymore. You know, it's said in the Bible, unless the man be born again, he will never see the kingdom of God. That was actually a reference to reincarnation, not in terms of changing your belief toward Christianity, actually. But each one of these masters have now conquered death, just as Satya Sai Baba, who it's said is a little bit more advanced than Maitreya. But he chose to incarnate in the typical way, with parents growing up and aging and then eventually passing away. And one of the masters, the Master Jesus, who actually is about 600 years old, was born in Syria about 600 years ago. If you were to see him today, he would look like he was in his 30s, but he's considerably older than everybody that's listening to this video, including myself, who looks way older than a 30-year-old. But he realized himself, not Satya Sai Baba, but the Master Jesus, realized himself as a master at the age of 4. So can you imagine being adult around this child who has all the wisdom of the ages, all the love of a master, has the full knowledge of himself being Jesus in a previous incarnation, but as a 4-year-old? I mean, it's just, I'm sure it rocked some skulls at that time, right? But most people think and have this fantasy that these masters might have realized themselves as a master when they're an adult, like it would be in a movie, you know. But that's not the case. They realize it much younger than that, and are fully aware and fully conscious, fully control over time and space and matter in that way at the tender age of 4. But prior to that, he had no idea who he was. Now, Satya Sai Baba, and I want to say 3 interesting stories before I move on to the next discussion, but about this particular master, is he had millions of devotees all over the world. Now, none of these masters, including Satya Sai Baba or Maitreya, desire devotees. We would think that he was just totally in love with the situation of him having millions of devotees. He didn't care about that. And one situation that was quite funny, but there's a lot to this discussion. There was a reporter at one of his gatherings in front of literally hundreds of thousands of people who were totally enraptured with what Satya Sai Baba was about to say, and were consider themselves true devotees of this guru, this true guru, not a fake guru. And this reporter looked to Satya Sai Baba and said, "What is it like to stand up and talk to all these hundreds of thousands of true devotees that you have?" And he goes, "None of them are true devotees." And it really took this reporter back, right? And he goes, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Out of this crowd of people, I only see one true devotee." And this reporter's looking at the crowd, "Well, who is it?" And Satya Sai Baba points to his dog. And if you have a dog, you would understand that that whole thing. I have a Velcro dog myself named Jojo, who's totally devoted to me, which means I have to be totally devoted to her. And that's pretty much all the devotees I want in my life. But His one true devotee was his dog. He didn't care about the other devotees. Was he concerned if people were listening to what he was saying and trying to absorb the truth of what he was saying? Of course, but he didn't want you just following him just for the sake of following him, right? The other story that I want to share that's kind of funny, and this was back when I was drinking. This was probably 20 years ago, maybe by now. I was listening to a video of his on YouTube, and he speaks in Hindi, and then he has a translator translating what he's saying in English. And I'm drinking wine. I wasn't drunk. I swear I wasn't drunk, because I think I had about a half a glass of wine at this point. And I'm drinking the wine, and I'm listening to what he's saying, and I'm kind of enraptured of what he's saying. I can't understand what he's saying because I don't speak Hindi, but I was listening to his translator. And at some point, all of a sudden I heard through my speakers, mind you, Sai Baba's voice say these very words: "Even though you drink wine, you're still divine." And I stopped and I went back and listened to the video. It wasn't on the video, right? But the other thing that I found, it was a wonderful story that relates to one of the mastery experience, was I have two dear friends of mine, Scott Champion, who runs the Benjamin Creme Museum, and his wife Olga were a part of the Atlanta Share International group with me years ago. And they used to go see Satya Sai Baba and Puja Party from time to time. And this one time they were about to leave, I asked Olga if she could find me a picture of Sai Baba that I could frame and put in my room. And she goes, "Which one do you want?" And I always admired this one photo of him, and he's kind of looking to the left, I think, and he smiles, and he has this wonderful smile. And I said, "I want that one." And she had it on her mantle. She goes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Got it. So apparently what happened was when she went there, she was going through the gift shop, and she thought about my request, and she started looking for that photo, and she couldn't find it anywhere. She said she went through every single photo that they had in this bin and couldn't find it. Asked the woman at the counter, "Do you have this photo?" And the woman said, "No, I think we sold out a few days ago, but we'll be getting some in a few days." Because now I'll be gone by then. I can't wait that long. And then she said she closed her eyes and she prayed to Sai Baba. Could he help her find this photo anywhere in this gift shop? And she said she turned around and looked, and right on the bin that she was looking at, right on top, was that very photo that I wanted. Isn't that incredible? Anyway, so I framed it, and that photo always means so much to me. And like I said, I hopefully we'll be able to see him in our lifetimes and hear what he has to say. But that will be the last time he comes back, apparently. So, but anyway, thank you very much for the question, nonetheless. Okay, Mark Hill, you had a couple questions for me. You said, "I have a question. Does Maitreya or Benjamin Creme ever mention prayer?" They both did. Now, Benjamin Creme didn't put a lot of emphasis on prayer because he wasn't really that devotional of a guy. He spoke more about invocation and meditation as a means of connecting to the divine, but you can connect to the divine in an aspirational way through prayer. Maitreya discusses the need for prayer, but he's also talking to people who are perhaps aspirational in that way. But if you're someone who is devoted to, let's say, Jesus, you can pray to Jesus. Or if you're devoted to Muhammad or Islam, you pray to Muhammad or Allah, right, or God or whatever. And that's a way of connecting yourself with the divine, of course. And Maitreya talks about the importance of prayer. So, but anyway, thank you very much for the question. All right, but it's also important to understand the function of invocation and meditation too. So. And also, of course, practicing honesty of mind, sincerity of spirit, and detachment in that way. Because when you realize yourself as the self, and even if you pray, you're praying to yourself. You're not praying to something separate than you, which is what most devotees do. All right. Next question. I'll try to answer quicker than that. You said, "Hoping you are well," and I hope you guys are well too. "I was just watching a documentary about John and Yoko, and the lyrics to the song Imagine," I love that song, by John Lennon, especially had me wondering if he in fact knew about Maitreya, or at least was moved or directed by the consciousness of Maitreya. Wow, it's a good question. I don't know. You also mentioned Alanis Morissette, and I'm a huge fan of Alanis Morissette. I think she's wonderfully poetic. I love her music, and I've actually seen her live, John Lennon was particularly advanced for most pop musicians, for sure. Unfortunately, of course, he was assassinated. But, was it inspired by Maitreya? Maybe not, only because Maitreya wasn't in the everyday world at that time. So Maitreya came into the everyday world in 77. He wrote that song before then. Could he have been? Maybe. I'm not saying no, but more than likely it was probably he was inspired by his own love of humanity, and he wrote that song in a very poetic and artistic way in that way. Also, that song, So This Is Christmas, and the other one that he and Paul McCartney wrote, Let It Be, about Mother Mary, if you're Catholic, right? And which is the only time I really ever think about the Madonna is when I hear that song, Let It Be. Wonderfully moving in that way too, But the reason why, Mark, and I just want to say this as quickly as I can because the video is getting really long. The reason why I suggested listening to that video about those master artisans in the Renaissance was because he talks about the relationship that disciples have with masters and the stage that we all go through and then eventually get as close to these masters in that way and so forth. So when somebody hears about the Ageless Wisdom teachings and they start to understand just ever so briefly about the concept of evolution of consciousness and point and evolution of consciousness that Benjamin Creme talked about, they immediately imagine themselves being a master, perhaps, or very close to being a master, or they hear about the masters and they are devotional, then they become very devotional to the idea of contacting these masters. It's almost universal. And you have to have some kind of objectivity to really understand the masters realistically. But there is an evolution of consciousness, and it takes millions of years, hundreds of thousands of lifetimes, even to get to this point where your soul starts to contact the personality in incarnation. Prior to that, the soul is in meditation toward its higher self, the monad, and doesn't even pay any bit of attention to the person. That's why when you see an average person or somebody who's even below average, humanity, they have little to no manifestation of the soul, of their own soul. They're just a personality in the world, and they're ignorant of the laws of life, and they're very destructive in a lot of ways and so forth. But then eventually, through that evolution, the soul, for whatever reason, they become receptive to the soul quality, and then the soul turns towards its reflection, the person, the man or woman in incarnation, and starts to give it a little bit of its energy, and it takes lifetimes from this point to the next point. But up until this point, then they start to maybe practice meditation. They start to be very, very aware of health of the physical body. They start to become a vegetarian. And you can see it in thousands upon thousands of people because this is where they're at. Because they're preparing themselves for the first great expansion of consciousness of the first initiation, which was symbolized in the Bible as the birth of Jesus. And then once that's taken, then they start to have many lifetimes where little to nothing happens. And then they start to get this desire, and then it turns into a burning desire to help the world in some way. They imagine themselves being greater than they are, having a wonderful purpose in life, and yet never fulfill upon that. And every one of these masters had to go through this very stage, right? Because the path is exactly the same for all of us, but yet different for all of us at the same time. But we all follow the same path. And then they start to become into rapport with a master in an ashram. And this is called at this point, it's called the Chila on the Thread. Well, actually, it's a little bit before they take the first initiation. But anyway, you get the point. But at that time, and this all happens on the inner planes, eventually it will be on the outer physical plane in the future. But it's said, and it talks about it in this video, that the master keeps the disciple at a distance and won't let them get any closer. And they have to go lifetimes with this type of very distant relationship with their own master until they get to a certain point. And then what happens is then the master provides them with a field of service to see what they do with it. plants an idea in their head, plants a picture of a philosophy or an art form or something. And if the disciple does something with it, well, then they give them a greater expansion of that field of service to do, because through service, we burn through karma, we evolve in that way. But those masters in that video that are artists, that are painters, but you can also look at it in terms of musicians like Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, for instance. They were becoming more and more advanced and becoming closer and closer to the relationship with their master, to where their minds were starting to become one. It's called the joining of the lights, or this, something like that. And the light of the disciple and the light of the master literally become one. And so when these master artisans and these master painters and even politicians like Lincoln and great philosophers and teachers like Jesus and Muhammad, when they spoke, they were speaking the ideas of the masters so well, because the light of that disciple and the light of the master were one. And that's what I wanted to share with you about the evolution of the disciple. So it might answer some of your questions that you have, even though it's talking about painters, and I know you're a musician and you don't relate to painters, you might get something out of that video. That's why I wanted you to see it. So hopefully you will at some point. I love you guys. Thank you very much. And as always, I can't wait to put up another video. You guys have a wonderful day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.